Well, greetings everyone who just watched The Territory. This is a brilliant and tragic film. It is so important in the era of Bolsonaro as we witness his regime's ruthless assault on indigenous peoples and on Brazil's environmental protections. We also see how his presidency has provided carte blanche to those who would ravage the Amazon and murder its defenders in a climate of impunity. The film goes a long way to bring nuance to a very complex topic surrounding the rights to land, the political power of large landowners in contrast to the besieged rights of indigenous peoples, and the desperation and determination of those who hoping to eke out a living from the forest, even while breaking the law. It also shows the power of organized resistance, where communities that have been marginalized by the state must take matters into their own hands to defend their lands and lives. I'm really pleased today to introduce this distinguished panel. Alex Pritz is the director of The Territory. He is a documentary film director and cinematographer focused on humans' relationship with the natural world. The Territory is Alex's directorial debut and premiered at the World Cinema Competition at Sundance this year, where it won an audience award and a special jury award for documentary craft. Chay Surui is the executive producer of The Territory. She is a 24-year-old indigenous activist from the Amazon, born on the front lines of the rainforest and raised by a family of warriors. She is one of the most prominent voices from the forest in the fight against climate change, having gained the world's attention with her powerful speech to world leaders at the COP26 summit in Glasgow last year. Tangai Uruwawao is a cinematographer and contributed greatly to what we saw today in The Territory. He is also a teacher and a member of the Jupau surveillance team that we saw in the film, which is an indigenous group of land defenders. He lives in the Uruwawao territory, which is one of the most vulnerable lands in the Brazilian Amazon. So I want to open up our Q&A session by asking you a question, Alex. What inspired you to tell this story? What drew you to the Brazilian Amazon and the complex issues surrounding indigenous rights and land tenure in this region?
I was drawn originally to Nadinha and her work. I'd read a lot about her advocacy for the rainforest and saw during the election campaign season in Brazil that, given Bolsonaro's rhetoric and the attacks against indigenous communities that he was beginning to mount, that her work and the work of those defending the rainforest was going to become a lot harder in the coming years. And so began a conversation with Nadinha and Gabriel, producer on the film. And through that, began several other discussions with, the Uruwao and everybody else that you see in the film. But really, the original impetus and connection to the film came through Nadinha herself.
Thank you. Chay, question for you. I noticed the footage of you in the film when you joined the Uruwawao land monitoring and defense mobilization following the murder of Ari. Can you tell us more about the impact that these activities have had to protect this territory from land invaders?
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon. Eu sou Chay Surui. I'm Chay Surui. How do I see mobilization for protection of our territory? We're facing attacks, direct attacks on our lands. This is what sustains the forest. So without the indigenous people's work and the Uruwawao and other indigenous peoples are doing here in Brazil, we wouldn't have any forest if it weren't for their work. This is not what I believe. You can see this. You look at this at any satellite image. If we have a forest, it's because of the indigenous people's fight and work. And that's what we're fighting for, to keep the forest and to maintain this biodiversity and maintain this cultural diversity that we have in Brazil and that the Amazon has. And what we're saying today is that not only is this important for us and our lives, but what affects indigenous people will affect you and everybody else. So that's the importance of the work that we've been doing.
Thank you, Chai. It's a really important perspective you're bringing. In fact, as the film opens up, I think we see a real visual representation of what you're saying, where we notice the time-lapse deforestation encroaching upon Indigenous territories. When we see these satellite images, we recognize Indigenous territories are islands of intact forest in a sea of deforestation. They are barriers for ecological integrity in the future of the forest, as you say, which is our future as well. They're completely intertwined. I also wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Gabriel, who is a photographer and a journalist based in the Brazilian Amazon. He is also a producer of this film. So he's also joining us on the panel today. But I have a question right now for Tangai, the filmmaker who contributed so much. And this film benefits greatly from the perspectives your camera brings to it. How was your filmmaking and your participation in this process received in the Uruel community?
Então, eu, primeiramente, né, eu sou Tanganho Ureual.
I'm Tangai Uruewawao,
O meu ponto de vista,
and this is my perspective.
esse trabalho, graças ao Gabriel e o Alex,
Thanks to Gabriel, thanks to Alex, you really helped me with my
o que eu mais queria na minha vida,
film. This is what I really wanted to do with my life.
muito
We were fighting,
território,
we were trying to defend our territory, but we hit a point where we could no longer be present. We were a young group of people.
que moramos na aldeia, sempre houve histórias.
We worked and we lived there. And those of us who lived there, we'd always heard stories from our grandparents about defending the land. And in terms of the film, what was very important was the following.
Fica na memória, né, da gente,
It's part of our memory.
perde o ente querido, e a gente, só que eu vejo uma coisa que o Alex e o Gabriel vem fazendo,
I see what Alex and Gabriel are doing,
em homenagem, né, ao final
which is
que eu sempre quis fazer,
making films, making documentaries.
e alguns
And I want to make more documentaries. I want to be able to tell our stories.
como se estivesse na presença, né, no caso.
I want to be able to present these
Para
stories.
mim isso é muito importante,
This is critical as I see it.
a gente tem os irmãos mais velhos, mas porém são poucos também, né? E muitos estão, né,
But
perdendo
we're so few,
Então, assim, eu queria
and we're losing
trabalhar na sala de aula,
territory.
trabalhar na sala de aula com esse tipo de informação, também mostrar através do filme que nós mesmos podemos
In addition to working with the information, we want to be able to use this film to show what we're doing,
E eu acho
just like what Gabriel and Alex are doing.
que
And it's
a
important.
gente beneficiar, as pessoas também podem ver a realidade.
It will be not just beneficial, but it'll also show what we're facing on the ground.
Contra a nossa palavra, contra
We hear a lot of people saying just the opposite. The government
a palavra, achando
distorts exactly what's happening.
que não é nada disso, né? Eu acho que o que
It's nothing like what they're saying. And now people can actually see the truth.
Bolsonaro,
Bolsonaro's government's discourse is always the opposite.
pessoas que estão destruindo a floresta, mas tem
They always say it's the NGOs that are destroying the forest or that they're encouraging growth in the forest. But we're really facing
leva muita ameaça,
threats.
através do discurso do governo, eles fortalecem os não indígenas entrar na terra
With the government's discourse, they basically
funciona. Aí,
help the non-indigenous to come in and grab our lands.
exatamente
It's encouraging to them. It's encouraging to these people. And that's the reality that we're facing. That's as indigenous people.
I think you touched on something that's very much something I want to discuss in today's panel, which is the climate of repression that is present in your environment in the Amazon today, primarily driven by the Bolsonaro regime and its henchmen around the country, and all those people who have received a signal from this regime that it is permitted to invade these territories and attack its defenders. It is this question around the climate of fear, which really pervades the film. I'd like to ask you, Gabriel, what was it like gaining access to the different people you profiled in this film, getting and being in these spaces? As I understand, journalists, filmmakers are often really attacked by the extreme right in Brazil, and I'm curious if you experienced this or any other conflicts of this kind as you gathered footage and told this story.
Yeah, one major difference that we can see nowadays is that historically it was always hard to get access to this side of farmers, invaders, and settlers. But then now that we have Bolsonaro, since Bolsonaro's inauguration, these guys they feel so supported by the federal government that they feel so embraced by the federal government that they're just fine with showing what they're doing, and they honestly they feel some sort of proud on doing that, and like they feel kind of happy to show that around and to spread their message and to spread their work, because they really believe that what they're doing is bringing progress to the Amazon rainforest. So I can tell you that it was much easier to show this other side of the story that we expected from the beginning, because they were so open to show what was going on. Even like showing, as you can see in the film, that there are a few environmental crimes that we were able to film, and they had no problem with us around with a camera, and they were not hiding their faces. So this is the current status. They feel so supported by the federal government that they feel like what they're doing is just fine, it's just right.
Thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, that's something I want to explore as well. Just how important it is to bring in this perspective. And I mentioned earlier the kind of impunity that these actors feel as it pervades the film. But I think that the nuance that this film brings is unique, because many films of this kind, and Alex, I have a question for you. Many films of this kind focus on a singular set of protagonists, often demonizing antagonists in monolithic terms. We see the good guys and the bad guys, right? But I think The Territory is especially effective because it includes the intimate perspectives of the guerrilleros, or the land grabbers, alongside those of the indigenous community. So I'd like to know, Alex, why did your team decide to tell both sides of this story in the way you did?
For us, it was really always about following the priorities of Nadinia and the Uruwa. We knew that we wanted to tell a story that was rooted in their perspective, and that was kind of our North Star. And so through conversations with them, it became obvious that they actually wanted us to try to do something different and more expansive than a lot of the other journalists who had come through. Bitete even expressed, he says it in the film, but he expresses some frustration at having to, chaperone these different journalists who come through and all end up with fairly similar reports. And, he didn't see much change happening from that. And at the same time, you have these people that are proud and operating with complete impunity. And so they said, go out, you're American, they'll speak to you, see what you can dig up. And at the same, the scene in the film where they're lighting fire to the rainforest, that happened that same summer. Bolsonaro was saying, as Tanguy mentioned, that it was the NGOs lighting fire to the rainforest. So from Bita and Nadinia's perspective, this was irrefutable proof that could help them in their mission to find justice. And so from there, we ended up finding some really compelling characters who were caught in a situation that I also found really familiar as an American. There were these echoes of manifest destiny and biblical prophecy and expansion of the colonial frontier, which were some of the same animating ideas that drove westward expansion and the violence against indigenous peoples that occurred here in my own country. And so I felt a certain amount of resonance there. And, we decided that this was something we wanted to keep following.
Well, I can say it does a real service to the storytelling element of this film that you were able to capture that. And also very interesting, your story about Bolsonaro's rhetoric and truly what is the flip side of that, which is the reality on the ground that land grabbers, often in the service of large landholders, are destroying the forest. setting fire to it after it's cleared of its precious woods. You know, this is what organizations like myself, my own, and many others on the ground in Brazil have been talking about for many years, but there's always this pervasive counterspin. And so I think the film does a great job. And I think the strategy that you mentioned of Pitate and Nadinha is a really good one, because it irrefutably tells that's the truth on the ground. Chai, you gained global attention with your address to world leaders at COP26 in Glasgow, during which you spoke about the killing of your friend Adi Uruewawao. What was the reaction you received to this speech? And why is it so important to support the work and well-being of Indigenous land defenders?
Então, né, eu fui lá falar para os líderes
Yes,
mundiais, né?
I went to speak to world leaders, but not just world leaders. I went to speak to the world about the importance of our struggle worldwide, just like I said before, the importance of keeping and maintaining the forests alive. And it's important that we are part of this protection. We know that indigenous lands protect more than conservation groups. There's another type of classification or protected areas in Brazil, but we protect even more than those quote unquote protected areas. So it's through indigenous struggles that we really help the land. And who's been doing this work? Who's on the front line doing this? We are on the front line, the indigenous people. And that's why it's so important to share what happened to Ari. He was fighting for the territory. He was a defender. He was fighting for our culture and fighting on behalf of everyone. He was fighting on behalf of everyone's well-being, our well-being and Brazil's well-being, the community's well-being as well. In fact, we actually recently found out that there was another member of the Uruewawao community who was killed. And of course, there's going to be impunity. We're never going to find out what happened. And we're here to show this and to get answers, to show what the defenders are doing, those who are on the front line, what they're actually doing. This struggle is not just ours. This fight is everybody's fight. All of us who are dying in the name of defending the land. People don't see this. Gabriel went back to the US. And I found out that people don't believe in climate change. At the same time, we see our lands on fire. We see our family members dying, being assassinated and killed on behalf of, in the name of protecting the forest, keeping the forest alive. In the last IPCC report, we found out that if Amazon destruction continues apace, at the same rate it's being destroyed, it's no longer going to be able to regulate world climate and weather, which is what it does right now. That's its job right now. And as you mentioned, environmental organizations have been saying this for years, and we indigenous people have been saying this for millennia. We've been talking about protecting the environment and the importance of keeping the forest healthy, alive, and the importance of fighting as indigenous people. And we need to increasingly support those who are doing this job.
Thanks a lot for your statements, Chai. And I wasn't aware of the other murder. This is an emergency that's occurring in the Amazon, a true bloodletting that has happened in recent years. It's not new, but it's become an extreme emergency that land defenders, human rights defenders are left completely vulnerable without support of the state. In fact, the state is targeting them. The state is truly responsible. You can lay this blood at the feet of Bolsonaro. And you can't understate the importance of land defenders in the future of the Amazon and our collective future. If the Amazon reaches the tipping point that you mentioned, Jai, and is no longer able to regulate our climate and regulate its own rainfall, it's truly a death knell for our civilization. And it's true also that many people don't even believe in climate change. And that's why this film is so important, telling this story in such an intimate way, bringing it to people, that this is their fight too. This is all of our fight. And we need to stand with land defenders and support them in all the ways we can. So thank you for bringing that. And it's incredibly important, the work that you and your colleagues are doing on the ground. I'd like to turn to Tangai, because you'd mentioned a bit about future projects. So what is the future of the Uruwawawaw's media team? Are you continuing to film the Uruwawawaw's efforts to resist land invaders, for example? Are you planning any new projects that tell stories about life in this community?
Olha, eu acho que no futuro,
Hmm.
como a gente, pequeno grupo de cinegrafistas, a gente fez
With our small group, we were able to do a lot of brilliant, amazing work. I think we need to look for more young people to work with us. We need to set up more young people, but more young people. We have to bring more young people into our groups. Every day that passes, we see more deaths, like Chai mentioned. A cousin of mine that I hadn't met was killed, in fact. The more death. In fact, my mother tells a story about this, parentheses. It's just, they have a better vision of what could happen in the future. We have to be prepared for the future. That's what they've always told us. I didn't start working as a cinematographer to be famous, but to show what we're doing. That's what I want to do. I want to tell stories. That's what I think we should be doing for our future. And I tell my family members, I'm only one person. I can't do everything. We've all got to roll up our sleeves and take part. That's what I think. I think we all need to be involved. We learn more and grow more by helping each other. Gabriel talked about this. Gabriel spent a lot of time. Alexis spent a lot of time with us. We learn from each other. And we always share ideas. I want to grow more by showing more just like what we're doing right now. That's very important to me. But what's absolutely critical for me is the territory. If we don't have territory, we don't have anything. That's our house. Our territory, we have everything. It's like home. We've got fish, we've got wood, we've got whatever we need. Our territory is our soul, our life, our home. It's everything.
Brilliant work that you've done for this film, Tangai. And I think the Uruwawawao media team is an incredible achievement. I hope that it continues. We work with the Munduruku people in the state of Pará, who also have an audiovisual collective telling these stories. We need to see more of these stories being told by the communities themselves. So thank you for all your efforts. I have a final question for Gabriel, and it has to do with what has the reaction of this film been so far? I mean, we've heard a bit about how it was lauded at the Sundance Film Festival, and I know that it's being released in a more full capacity later this year. But I imagine there's been screenings in different places that you've attended in Brazil and elsewhere, and I'm curious. What is the range of reactions, and whether some of the people on the other side, you could say, some of the other voices and opinions that you bring into the film, if they've been able to see it and how they've reacted to it?
Actually, we didn't have our first Brazilian screening yet. It's going to happen in April, early April. So in the meantime, we presented this film in the US, soon in Denmark, and a few other countries. And we're super excited and we're super happy with the audience response to it. Recently, BTT was in the US talking to the audience. It was amazing. It was the first time there that one Uruguay person was outside Brazil, and was such an interesting experience for him. Also, like to share knowledge and to share stories with other filmmakers. But here in Rondônia, since the film hasn't been released yet, things are still calm, and I hope things keep calm, keep like this. But we are slightly concerned because, like, as you could see, there are, for example, Nedinha, she has already received death threats. The same with Chai, the same with pretty much everyone, and all these surveillance team members. So we are concerned about that. We do have like several safety protocols and things that we can do if something bad happens. But I hope that we don't need to use these kind of things. And honestly, like when we started filming, when we approached this other side of the story, we were always, and Alex can tell you better about that, we were always very clear and very honest, saying, hey, like, we're talking to every single side of this story. We're talking to different sources, and not even like two different sides, but we are also talking to the government, to the police, to law enforcement. We are talking to everyone in order to understand. You know, like, we're not foreigners, because I'm a Brazilian person, but I'm from Sao Paulo. I moved to the Amazon in 2016. So this is my reality nowadays, but I'm not very used to the same way that these guys who are here on the ground are. So our first and our very like often status was just, we're here to learn, we're here to listen, all sorts of stories, all kinds of sides of this story, and we were very clear and honest about that. So the way that we portrayed this other side, they were all aware of that. You know, we were not using hidden cameras or something. They knew what we were doing. They knew that we were there, and it was this agreement that we were there, showing what they were doing. So I do believe that the way we portray the story is very honest, is very sincere, because they are telling their stories. Like, the indigenous guys are telling the stories. The invaders, the settlers, the farmers, they are just telling their stories. It was not us with a voiceover or making questions. We're just like being very observational. So I think that their response to the film, I hope they will understand. But I think that Alex can explain a little bit more about that as well, because he like, at a certain point we had to split our teams. So Alex spent much more time with this other side.
Yeah, please expand on this, Alex, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really difficult year for Brazil politically. It's an election year. Bolsonaro is up for re-election October 2nd. And so, you know, releasing the film in this climate, we're prepared for anything. We've got really serious safety protocols for everybody involved in the team. But, you know, we're waiting to release the film in Brazil and see how that reaction is. You know, during production and throughout that process, we, as Gabriel said, we're really honest and clear with everybody, and talked about story arcs and portrayals and how things were going to be depicted. And, you know, everybody felt good about that at every step of the journey. And so now it's just up for us to release the film and see how it interacts with the larger political dynamics that exist in Brazil at the moment.
Well, it's a powerful end product that can have that sort of impact. And as a human rights and environmental campaigner, this is the kind of product we want to spotlight and we want to hold up as much as possible, because of the impact it can bring at this crucial moment for the Amazon, for human rights, for democracy. So I want to thank all of you for your brilliant work on this film. I can tell you personally, I was deeply touched by this film and ran through a whole gamut of different emotions watching it. And I think that even for folks who aren't familiar with the Amazon, it can elicit that response, and that's what we need. We need to get people engaged on this, and it's this sort of storytelling that will achieve that. So thank you all. It's been really an honor to moderate today's panel with all of you. And I look forward to seeing the film continue to make a real splash across the world, as it deserves to.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.